Whenever Zara, Anu, and Aubrielle, you are ready, we can get started.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Bennion Center's Direct Service and Advocacy Forum, and we have three incredible guest speakers here with us tonight who are going to talk to you about their involvement in the community and ways that you can get involved. So the way this forum will be formatted is that we will first do some introductions with our three guest speakers. We have a couple of planned questions that we're going to be asking our speakers, and then we'll open up the floor at the end of the time for just a bit of any other questions that come up from anyone else who is here. So yeah.
Okay, I don't care about this.
Can you give me?
Okay. Yeah, and just as community guidelines, we'd love to have y'all have your cameras on if you feel comfortable, because it kind of helps to create a bit more of a conversation, but please don't feel any pressure to. And then also, if we could just keep our microphones muted when we're not speaking, that would be also a great help to the group. Anything else to add, Zara and Hanu?
Let's get started.
All right. With that being said, we want to have the guest panelists introduce themselves. So just state your name and your pronouns, a little bit of your background, education, and then a little bit about the organization you're representing. So whoever wants to take it off, and then we'll go from there.
I guess I can get started. So, hey everyone, my name is Chase Thomas. I use he, him pronouns. And background. So I'm originally from Arizona. I've been in Utah for about 10 years now. I got my bachelor's degree at Arizona State University in political science, and then came up to Utah to get my law degree at BYU. While I was at BYU, decided I didn't really want to be a lawyer, so I pivoted toward public policy and had some internships in civil rights organizations, including the ACLU here in Utah and out in New York City in their LGBT rights program. After that, I became involved with Alliance for a Better Utah, started as their policy director, and now I'm the executive director of the organization. So as background of the organization, Alliance for a Better Utah, we've been around for 10 years now. This is our 10th anniversary. Our mission is to drive a public narrative that empowers Utahns and holds public officials accountable. So we focus on generally communications, using political communications, both publicly, like on social media, emails, direct actions, and also coordinating things in the background to help advocate for policies that help our entire state and everyone who lives here. And then also holds politicians accountable, not only for things that are illegal or unethical, but for not acting in ways that help Utahns and advance progressive policies. So it keeps us busy here. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
My name is Jess. I'm the Director of Community Outreach and a community organizer at Crossroads Urban Center. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I come originally from San Diego, and then I went to Rhode Island for my undergrad. I got a degree in theology and public and community service studies. And then I came to Utah for my graduate degree in community leadership at Westminster. And I've been here for 5 years. Most of my career, I've been working, well, all of my career, I've been working in nonprofits for a portion of it. I worked in direct service. I started as a case manager for homebound seniors at the Legal Aid Society in San Diego. And then I was a nutritionist at the Women, Infants, and Children program. And since I've been in Utah, I came here for grad school with no job, and I was just taking a risk. And thankfully, the month after I got here, I found the job with Crossroads. So I've been with in this position ever since. At Crossroads, we run three direct service sites, 2 emergency food pantries, and 1 is a clothing distribution center. Our mission overall is to help or assist and support Utahns in need in addressing their need for basic right to access basic rights. We do that both through direct services, literally distributing clothing and household goods, food, and other emergency services. And we also do it through systemic work. So we primarily engage in community organizing, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, that's us in a nutshell.
Hey everyone, my name's Shelby. I use she, her pronouns, but all pronouns are welcome. I am the Tribal Relations for American Indian Services. We are a scholarship program that provides scholarships for Native American students all across the nation. We also provide a STEM prep program for middle school students that helps to fill in learning gaps. Let's see, I don't know, I don't ever get the opportunity to talk about myself. I have worked in tribal education my entire life. Born and raised on the Ute reservation. I'm a descendant of the Ute tribe. And so my whole focus is advocating for Native American students and Native American communities and ensuring sovereignty and making sure our voices are heard. That's me.
Nice, thank you so much. This question, I think a lot of you already answered it, especially with like Native American communities and things like that. But could you just share more about what communities your organization serve, what needs they may face that others might not know about, and just like maybe are there certain aspects of that community that like you particularly are addressing through your work as an organization?
Guess I'll go first again. I don't know. So our Alliance for Better Utah, we don't have like a direct service aspect of our organization. So I'll speak more in our communications audience role is how we talk about it. So, I mean, primarily our audience is all Utahns, but since we have a progressive focus. I would say it's mostly progressive Utahns. So those who hold progressive values or don't know they hold progressive values, but that's how they think and speak. And that's what we're trying to convince them of. So yeah, it's a pretty broad, large audience. Different projects that we have go towards different sub-audiences, whether they're rural versus urban, or I don't know, Gen Z versus the boomers. So yeah, we try to make it as accessible to everyone in Utah, but specifically for progressives.
We also don't have a specific population that we serve. In our direct service, we are primarily serving folks who are experiencing economic hardship, folks who are low income. At our downtown pantry, about 60%, this number has been increasing drastically since 2009 and also since the pandemic. 60% of those we serve are unsheltered. But we really serve anyone. We don't even have a residency requirement. We're grateful that we have we don't take any grants at this moment that require a lot of reporting. And so we don't require any sort of verification of residency. You don't have to be a Utah resident, of income. We just believe if you are asking for help, you deserve to have your basic needs met without question. And our advocacy is the same way. It's pretty open, although we engage mostly in community organizing, which is a model that believes people who have experiences are the ones who are best suited to address those experiences, to bring solutions forward. And so in those, primarily, we are working with folks who are low income, unsheltered, or have been in the past, have experiences with that.
So at AIS, we serve all students, all Native American students that can prove lineage from a federally recognized tribe in their higher education. So it doesn't matter where they're going, as long as they can prove that they're Native American or Alaskan Native, we will serve them. And that's for the higher education. When it comes to middle school students, it's the same. However, we do have sites on different reservations throughout the states. So our goal with that is reservations are rural communities. And so the resources that they have available aren't the greatest. And so our purpose is to bring resources to them. Our sites include Pocatello, Idaho, Blanding, Utah, Tuba City, South Dakota. And although we are on those specific reservations, we have students that aren't just from that tribe that we're serving. We have students from all nations coming to us.
Abrielle, do you want to take off?
Yes, sorry. I just realized everyone had already answered. Awesome. So yeah, thanks for kind of giving us a good introduction of how y'all are involved in our community. I think that's amazing. So our next question, you can answer just based on your own organization's involvement, if it's more on the direct service end of things or advocacy, but I'd love to hear from all of you. How do you incorporate direct service and or advocacy into your organization's vision and goals? So I guess, what does that look like for the organizations that you're a part of? And I know this has already been touched on a little bit, but just diving into that would be great.
I don't know if we want to go the same order each time. Oh, Jess, I just saw you on mute. Do you want to go?
That's okay. I was just mixing it up, but we can just keep it in the same order. I'm also fine with that.
Okay. So yeah, our vision, I could look it up and read it. We have like a vision on our website, but it's a more progressive Utah where Utahns act through their government to create a more progressive Utah that works for everybody. So a lot of that is based on policy. So advocating for policies, holding elected officials accountable. When it comes to goals though, it's a very long-term vision for us. And some of our goals, like passing Medicaid expansion, we wish it would have taken just one legislative session of advocacy working with our partner coalition up there. But it ended up taking 6 years in the ballot initiative. So a lot of our advocacy is built on incremental changes. So we do a lot of polling to understand how people are talking about issues. So we focus in on polling and research on what's called values-based messaging. So what are the values that we hold and how can we connect those to policies? And as we talk about those ourselves, talk to politicians and tell them that we should be talking this way, other organizations, and getting that message out constantly through social media, through advertising, through events. And then over time, we see that more people are talking about it with these same values. We can see that these changes are happening year over year. We also do it just based on a number of contacts that we have with people over social media or through emails. We don't do as much organizing. That's something that we're trying to start build up and getting a volunteer base and an organizing base. But that'll be something else that we're adding on, is how many people are we organizing around issues ourselves or with our partners and coalitions. We're also a special type of nonprofit. We're a 501c4, which means that we can get more involved with political elections. And so we also have election related goals as well. And same thing, although we wish that we would be flipping seats from conservative to progressive elected officials, it doesn't happen super often here in Utah. It's usually one seat at a time. So that's a good goal whenever we meet that, but it's also the progress that we make, how many votes we're getting, how many people we're getting registered. It's every year just moving a little bit further towards our vision and our goals.
Crossroads, I already mentioned we engage in both direct service and advocacy in terms of our programming. So I'll just recap our direct services. We provide food, vouchers for medication, vouchers for gasoline, transit passes, formula, diapers, and utility assistance. And then we also provide clothing and household items for folks who are in need between our 3 sites. And then we do our advocacy work. We have a community organizing group of women who are mothers who are low income. We have a group in the Poplar Grove neighborhood doing neighborhood organizing. And then we have a housing specific project and a coalition of religious communities. In addition to our programming, our organization began in like 1905 when the United Methodist Women started the programs, but it was not formalized until 1966. At that time, it was completely direct service. It also became non-religiously affiliated, but it had these really deep roots. The United Methodist Women are a group from the United Methodist Church who exist exclusively to address the root causes of poverty. And so while they were engaging in direct service, it was a free school for a while, a drug rehab center for a while, a community center for a while, eventually became the food pantry and thrift store. It always had an eye towards addressing the root causes of poverty, because we know for every one person who comes and receives services, if the system doesn't change, 3 or 4 more will be behind them. And so in the 70s, that actually was added to our mission statement, that we engage in systemic work as well, so that it would stay a part of the organization regardless of who was driving the ship. And in addition to that, our board of directors, our bylaws dictate that our board of directors have to be 51% community served at least. And we have a board of directors of 25, which is pretty large for a nonprofit. But what that means is both in our programming and in our board, which is the governing body of the organization, we try really hard to constantly be in communication with the community we're serving, so that the services that we provide are what the community actually needs, and the advocacy work we're engaging in is based on what we're hearing from the direct service, and it's a cycle that they influence one another. And so for us, having both of those things, it's really hard and it's really unusual for an organization to do both. It is a challenge for us all the time, but we believe in engaging in both.
So at AIS, the direct service that we have is with our STEM prep program. It's one-on-one with our students. And the other program that we have is very hands-off. It's our scholarship program. And so students from all over the nation will apply, and it's just hands-off. We don't work directly with them until they need another scholarship, or we're working out their finances. So some of the other stuff, and the way our vision at AIS is to, I mean, you can go on our website and read our long stuff, but it's essentially to help students retain their cultural sovereignty and retain their culture and fill in learning gaps that come from disadvantages that happen from living on the reservation and receiving tribal education. And so we're there to aid students, and there's this we call it the Western education system. And so Native American students, they are it's adapting into it. And so how can we aid in tying in culture and traditions into this Western education system? And the way that we do that is through college application literacy. And so the students that that are going to college that are coming from the reservation. They're more likely first generation college students. They don't have anybody that can help them figure and navigate all of this out. And that's part of the hands-on stuff we do with our higher education students. Our goals and the way that we fulfill our goals is based on how many scholarships we give out per semester. And we are working on increasing it, but right now each semester we give out approximately 25,000 scholarships. So 25,000 every quarter, every semester. And scholarships, scholarships can range anywhere from the minimum scholarship is 500, the maximum scholarship is 2,000. We like to give out those 2,000s though. That's always our goal. And so the students that receive those, part of it is that we want to recycle the education in a sense. And so a student that receives our scholarship, to meet our vision and to meet our goal, they come back to their community. We make them pledge or promise and that they'll go back to their community and that they'll help their people. And so that ultimately has a ripple effect in their communities, in tribal communities. Yeah, so hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, perfect. And for the next question, some of y'all definitely touched on this, but what are some of the biggest challenges y'all have encountered as you advocate or directly serve your communities? And you can touch on challenges you've seen in the past or COVID-specific challenges that have made your organization's goals an extra bit of an element of hardship this year.
I don't know. At Alliance for Better Utah, I'd say one of the biggest challenges is our broad mandate. So we're not an issue specific organization. We're not just working on healthcare, or we're not just working on civil rights or education. We take on every issue, but we're a very small organization. And so we have to pick and choose, even though, I mean, I would say all of us that work here, we're bleeding heart liberals and we want to help everyone and do everything. And so we always feel stretched thin or can't be helping everybody who asks for help or reaches out to us for help. And so, I mean, I guess the thing that's tied to that is money. And that seems like that's just the eternal problem of nonprofits, is always finding money somewhere. So there's that. I mean, during COVID, I would probably say the biggest challenge for us was staying connected with the community and the people we talk to. It's been a hard year for not only us that are working, but for the people that we communicate with. And also just trying to figure out how government bodies were functioning and trying to make sure that they were accessible to the public, and advocating for that as well. And trying to keep people interested in politics when the entire world felt like it was just blowing up around us, not only from the past election, but a pandemic. So it's been a rough year, but we just keep on working. And I think technology has plugged a lot of those holes. It's different talking to the rest of our staff on little squares rather than in an office and throwing ideas at each other and trying to be creative after reading the news, but we made it work.
Two challenges. COVID specifically in both direct service and advocacy has been an extreme challenge. We, of course, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, we serve about 50,000 people a year in our direct services. We have a staff of 14, half of whom are part-time, and that splits between our advocacy work and our direct service staff. So we have a really big team of volunteers that help us make sure that we can serve that number of people. It comes out to about 100 or 125 people a day to serve, not the volunteers, sorry. And when COVID began, we had to send everybody home, right? It didn't make sense for everyone to be isolated from their jobs and schools and then come in to our organization. So we ended up with a staff of 4 running all of our direct service. It's exhausting. We are continuing, we have expanded a little bit more, so it's getting smoother. We anticipate the challenge will continue because at this moment, the stimulus money is happening. There's a lot more money being funneled into the community, both on the individual level and for services. But I mean, hopefully it does not end, right? We advocate for government subsidies of lots of things, but the reality is that at some point that will probably end and we'll be facing higher numbers of evictions, people needing our services more and more. On the general, and then on advocacy in terms of COVID, most of the people we organize are already strapped for resources. So all of the challenges that any parent began facing when schools closed and they had to work their kids at home, that was happening. And then on top of that, lack of access to the internet, the digital divide is a huge issue for us. It's really hard to get people to engage online if they don't have internet that's fast enough on top of all of the other stressors in their life, right? Trying to navigate all of that. Generally speaking, in our advocacy work, we face much of the same as what they do at Alliance for Better Utah. The folks that I mentioned in our model, it's community organizing, and in our issues area specifically is poverty. So we know that people who have experienced poverty know barriers to escaping poverty and having financial stability or whatever success looks like for them in a way that the makeup of our legislature does not have. We have a primarily, I just actually looked at the numbers today. This is primarily white, primarily male makeup of our legislature. Many of them have never faced financial hardship. And so they just don't have the same level of empathy necessarily, because when you face something, you feel differently about it. And so creating space for our folks to be able to come in and have a voice at all is a really, really big challenge in the context of Utah. And we work at all levels, like schools, community councils, all the way up to the legislature. And it's a little bit different in every one of those bodies, but it is a big challenge. Like Chase was saying, most of our goals are very long-term. We don't assume that we're going to get one thing done in one session, which also presents the challenge of keeping people engaged. How do you tell people it's going to be 1 step forward, 5 steps back, and after 5 years, we'll get this thing accomplished? It's really hard to keep people motivated, but it's a really beautiful challenge to have. But yeah, those are our challenges.
So the pandemic, it hindered our ability to work with students one-on-one. And so there's a generation of students that we have missed that will not have learning gaps that were filled through our programs. And we're working on remedying that this summer and extending the offer for the middle school STEM prep program. When it comes to the college level students, the issues that they have faced is, like just mentioned, when a student is in a rural area or has internet connection issues, these students that have come out to the city or come out to a larger area to receive their education, they've been sent home back to their reservation where they're unable to do their schoolwork because of, it's a rural area. That's just one of the trials that come with it. The part of it's almost a double-edged sword. Because of COVID, it's really brought to light the struggles that Native American communities and Native American students face. And so this year we actually received we had a very large donation year for people because of COVID, it was highlighted the struggles that Native American communities have. And so we're grateful in a sense that it's brought light and that it's brought money for our organization to be able to distribute amongst our students. Some of the I think it was I think it was Chase that mentioned this, but money is always a struggle. So we're a very word of mouth organization. And so we have been around since the early 60s, but people are unaware of us because there's only ever been 4 to 5 of us running this entire operation. And so getting it out, having awareness and publicity about what we offer is always hard. And within Native communities, it's all about trust. And so if a student trusts us, they're going to tell everybody. They're going to tell who they need to tell. And one of the struggles is whenever you go into a Native community, you have to establish the trust first. You can't just go in there, even though we're offering money for our students, we still have to establish trust. And so trust with tribal communities or tribal students takes a long time to develop. And so that kind of slows our progress down. The other thing is our donor base is very centralized in Utah. And, this ties back into our publicity and into our marketing. And so our donor base is Utah. And, there's only so many donation sources in Utah. And right now we're working on how do we reach outside of Utah? How do we reach outside of the Four Corners area? Even with students, not necessarily donations, but all of our students are based within the Four Corners area. And so that includes, I think it was 75% of our students, or maybe it was 65% of our students are from the Navajo Nation. And we're working on branching out because it's not just this area that we serve. We have students all over the place. And so how do we grow? How do we expand this, but also keep our bases in line with only 4 of us? So that's some of the struggles that we have.
Yeah, that I can't imagine the difficulties that COVID plus all the regular stuff that sounds really difficult. I guess tying into that, I wanted to ask, it sounds like all 3 of your organizations are heavily, dependent and reliant on some sort of external funding, whether that be grants or donations. And something that I'm personally curious about was like, how does your organization report, measure success and keep track of impact? And can you talk about the importance of that when it comes to things like donations, funding, grants, and things like that?
Yeah, I sort of touched on this earlier when we were talking about goals. It's really hard because a lot of people want very measurable, immediate impacts. So whenever somebody thinks of a nonprofit, they normally think of a direct service organization where you're giving out this many things or helping this many people. Because we're involved in politics and long-term change and policies, it's harder. Sometimes we can report, hey, we worked with a coalition and we got this law passed, or we prevented this abortion restriction this year at the legislative session. But we're not always so lucky. And so a lot of the time our impact is we were able to create a new coalition around reproductive rights and abortion access that involved nonprofits that had never talked about it before. Or we created a TikTok channel last year and we got 5,000 followers within a few days. And we have that new stream of communication or impact with a new generation that we weren't reaching through other social media channels. So it's a lot more untraditional impacts or measurements. I mentioned before, we do a lot of polling to measure how people believe or talk about things. testing messages to see if they're resonating different over time. And then it also, when we go into political, like I said before, it's not just flipping seats. We also work with coalitions there, finding new candidates, building a bench that, and even if they don't win, at least they're getting their name out there, and it might take them 3 years of running until they get it. But then also doors knocked, registration forms filled out. So it's a lot of incremental measurements that are building up towards our long-term measurements of where we're trying to get. And I guess how that relates into donations, I mean, we don't want to bombard people with just a ton of numbers that they don't understand. A lot of it just comes with saying, these are the issues we worked on. These are the programs that we did. We also have an affiliated 501c3, which is a more traditional education nonprofit. And that one, we get traditional grants to where we do things like panels. So numbers of panels we hosted throughout the year, or debates that we do during election year. We're doing a civic engagement toolkit, and the type of measurements that we are trying to measure once we launch that next month is like the knowledge that people are gaining, how many modules are they going through, and how many actions do they take after making a civic engagement plan. So it's a lot of things that I wouldn't normally expect a nonprofit to be measuring. And some of our donors ask about that, but a lot of them really give to us on a smaller level basis, just because they agree with the values we represent in the work that we do, and see that over time we're making a difference, and don't really need to have all those numerical, like all that numerical data to show our worth to the state.
As I mentioned earlier, we have what I consider a luxury to not have to accept grants that require a lot of red tape. So our reporting is not, doesn't have to be really specific for some of our projects. On our most of our funding, like 85 to 90% of our funding comes from individual donors. We have a budget of about $1 million a year, so that's quite a lot. It's unusual, but mostly it's because of our long history. We also are having an eye towards, we have a donor base that is aging. So we're like looking at how to look forward and bring new people into the fold. We also receive private small family foundation grants. So I always say, like, if you look around Utah, most of the names that are on the buildings have a family foundation that give to us. So we're really grateful for that. And a lot of that comes from interpersonal connections, just over the years communicating with people. On our organizing side, many of our metrics are what Chase mentioned. Organizing doesn't come in, it's not easily quantifiable, the outcomes, and they're very long term. So we have really small action steps that we try to accomplish, like distributing this number of flyers, reaching out to this number of people. We met with a representative this week. And part of organizing is, in order for people who've been marginalized and excluded from policymaking to feel comfortable in policymaking, an element of skill building and confidence is part of that. So that's also part of our metric. It's like individual change. And then our direct service side, even though we don't have to gather a bunch of numbers and metrics, we do gather some number of people a year. But I think what people are most interested in are the stories of people that we help, the stories of why we help. Success is an interesting word because we say, like, we served 50,000 people last year. That was a success in that we got that number of people food and emergency services. But if the reason that number went up from the previous year is because more people are not able to access resources, advocacy wise and community wise, is that a success, right? Like, we would rather it would be much brighter if the numbers were going down because people didn't need us. So it's an interesting sort of like, when we reach out to donors, we try to remind them of both things. Like, here are our numbers. Also, let's make sure we keep this big vision of what our system is like and what we do as a community, and really why we're like an important piece to the network and the community puzzle, and how other people can be involved in that.
So like all of this, how it's a concept, right? It's like, what is success? What does success look like? It looks like it's different to everyone. And with our program, where we have two almost opposite programs, our middle school program, we're able to measure the success of our students because we work directly with them. And because we're there, we're hands-on, we are fully engaged with those students. And so we can measure we can measure through testing to show improvement and to see graduation rates within that program. And testing is such a daunting word, but it's not awful. We're not state core testers. We just want to track our progress and see what other gaps need to be filled in for the students next year's, or if we need to extend the program for them. When it comes to our hands-off program, we as a board, the board generally agrees that if we can get a student off of their reservation or into any sort of higher education, whether it's a certificate program or a four-year college, no matter what it is, if we can get one student that is Native American into any university, into any accredited school, that is a success for us. And so we really highlight our students that have that's an accomplishment, leaving your family, leaving what you're comfortable with, leaving your culture, leaving your traditions, and going into a foreign world that is higher education. That's successful to us. And if we can fund that and help make them comfortable, we count it as a win. And it's one of the great things about our program is if a student if they finish out their undergraduate, they'll more than likely go on to receive their higher they'll go on to receive doctorates or bachelors. And so we have I like to throw out statistics, but I know it's high. Don't quote me on the statistic, but if a student graduates with their bachelor's degree that we funded, they will more than likely go on to receive 2 or more master's degrees. And that's extremely, extremely awesome. And we count it all as a win. There's no lose here.
Thank you so much for sharing that insight. I think that's really interesting to hear the similarities and differences in the approaches of all 3 of your organizations. So we do have time for one last question, and then we will open up the last couple of minutes for folks to ask any other burning questions they might have. So really, we would just love to ask each of you what advice you would give students interested in getting into direct service and advocacy, perhaps based on your own experience or in general, just what you think students should be prepared for. Any wisdom you'd like to impart would be awesome.
Well, there are so many different ways to get involved in advocacy based on your personality, your style, what you're interested in. And so I can't say all the different ways. So I guess based on my personal experience, I really didn't get involved in advocacy until law school. And the way I did was, one, through internships that just sounded interesting. I had to get paid internships just because I couldn't get any type of loan or grants for my summer internships. And so it limited what I was able to do, but those helped. And then also I got really involved with clubs and organizations based on policy and advocacy while in law school. It was pretty easy to get involved and become leadership at BYU in a progressive organization because it was, BYU, and there were only a few of us sitting around the table, but we became a very tight-knit group. I was able to go to national conventions and represent our school. Took every opportunity I could take with that organization and figure out which policy areas I was interested in, how I could develop those skills, making connections. And it was based on that organizational experience from law school that a few months after I graduated, somebody called me up that had been a member for years during her career and said, "Hey, we have a position at this organization. Do you want to come work for us?" And that's where I'm at now. So it's real, I don't know. It's just becoming involved in what's passionate for you. And I'm not extroverted. I'm very introverted. I'm shy. I don't like going up and talking to people I don't know. And so I prefer sitting behind a computer screen, writing out my thoughts, thinking through long-term strategies. And that's the type of job I got. And so there's a way to advocate out there for everyone, depending on what you're passionate about, what issues you care about, and how you interact with others. So you can be an activist, going to protests out in the street if that's your thing, or you can write op-eds and try and convince people on social media. There's a ton of ways to get involved if you're interested.
Advice would be to give yourself time and compassion. Builds on what she's saying. We live, I think, in a culture, at least in my experience, that is very, you have to know what you're doing right now. You went to school, you're a student, you should know what you're doing next. What you decide now will be forever. Like the pressure around deciding what college to go to, the pressure around what job to decide. And the reality is that that's not how life works. Definitely there are different luxuries that different people have because of privilege, different privileges with the way the system is set up. But there is also, because there are so many options and opportunities, what happens today might not be your forever, and to be open to exploring. Like, I spent 5 years in direct service, and I actually felt quite a lot of shame for feeling so much burnout and so much emotional heaviness from that work, because I was like, no, I studied public service. I know I want to be in this. And it wasn't working out. And so I finally had this opportunity to switch over to more of an advocacy organizing role and outreach role and support the nonprofit in other ways. Really never thought in my life I'd be living in Utah doing this job. A series of random and unexpected events landed me here that I never would have guessed would have happened. And so just allowing yourself space to flow with what's happening, and trying to let go of that overarching narrative that every decision you make is the final decision.
So the most important piece of advice that I could ever give anybody when entering a tribal community or a rural community is you need to have humility. You need to understand that going into this, you are not going to change things overnight. And especially with tribal communities, we have issues that are long-standing, and it's not going to change overnight. And so it's about relinquishing some control in yourself and in some of your work, and being able to engage with the tribal community, with individuals on a personal level. And rather than trying to change the whole system, you should find gratification knowing that you've helped one person or one family, and understanding that that one person is going, I think I already mentioned this, it's a ripple effect. So that one person is going to go and help their immediate family. That immediate family is going to help their community and their tribe, and it's going to ripple out. And so, we go in to communities thinking that we're going to save them. And it's not about saving them, it's about helping them and lifting them up rather than reaching down and pulling them out. We have to come up from underneath, be on the ground level, and lift our communities up. So humility and understanding and compassion for yourself and for the individual you're working with.
That was really nicely said. Thank you, all of you. Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing all that. Yeah, we're coming in on closing in on the hour. So does anybody have any last questions for our wonderful panelists? Cool.
You
Okay.
can drop them in the chat too. Oh yeah. One more minute. It's okay if not. Oh, we got one.
All right, so Joy asked, yeah, and I think Jess sort of just talked about this a little bit, but I think maybe particularly this year, a lot of us are feeling burnout as students. And then a lot of your direct service and advocacy work is, known for having high levels of burnout, high rates of burnout in your and changeover. So how do you combat burnout in your work?
For us, the way that we do it is just giving space for people to combat burnout. We take extremely progressive views with time off policies. Like if people need to have a mental health day or need to have a mental health week based on things that are happening with work or personal life, we let them do it. And because we try to just make everyone focus on their whole self and not just their work self, because they're bringing their whole self with them to work every single day, not just their work self. So we talk about we're freely open with the fact that if we're feeling burnt out, we let people know and say, hey, I just need to sign off for the rest of the day. And we don't question them on it. So it's helpful for the rest of my staff, but it's also helpful for me. I went through really bad mental health crisis at the end of last year, not only because of burnout, but with the COVID, and my boss gave me the space to take off as much time as I needed. So it's helpful in that way with nonprofit organizations sometimes versus a lot of other organizations because they are more flexible. And we just try to reflect that.
So, going off of what Chase said, your mental health is so important. You need to take care of yourself physically and mentally. And so the way I handle this is I prioritize what needs to get done, what has the most high risk, what has the most impact at work. And then when I'm done with work, and this is a little hard for people that work in the nonprofit world, but inevitably you need to leave work at work. You need to leave your work at work, and you need to come home and you need to take care of yourself. And that can be, very, very basic stuff. So taking a shower, doing some downtime, like doing a hobby and it sounds so obvious, but it is so important, and we forget the obvious sometimes. And so taking care of yourself is the best way to be able to refresh your mind, refresh your body, and then head into work the next day and take care of what you need to take care of. Also, I love therapy, like huge advocate for therapy. If you get the chance, go to therapy. Like, even if you think you don't need it, it helps. It's great.
I talked a little bit about it before, but piggybacking on what Chase and Shelby have mentioned in terms of taking care of self, when you're working in direct service and in advocacy work, sometimes like She was saying it's like easy to miss the obvious, and it's easy to forget that you are confronting some of the darkest places of our system, right? Constantly. You are confronting the fact that we are failing other people. Our system is built on lots of oppression and marginalization. And the reason we work in it is to make a change in that, because we know we can rebuild it, but it is also affecting us as we do the work. We are experiencing the traumas of the system, systemic trauma. So there's a lot of research on the importance of movement, and that physical movement processes emotion through your body. I'm actually writing a paper on it right now. Even when you're not thinking about the issue that you're working on, getting up and moving allows your body to move that emotion. We are animals in the same way that like an animal who's been chased by a predator, watch them after the chase has ended, the animal typically will like shake, full body shake to process the energy out. We have the same responses. Our brain just often overrides it, and we live in a system that tells us to override it. So I'm always an advocate of all of the things that have already been mentioned. And also like movement in whatever way that looks like walking, yoga, hardcore exercise, extreme exercise, mountains, whatever it looks like for you, walking around your house, cleaning, like doing anything to get your body moving.
I love that. And thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing kind of your individual strategies for combating burnout. Thank you, Joy, for that question. That is, I think, one that all like budding activists and folks getting involved in direct service and advocacy have to grapple with at some point. So hearing from you all as experts, so to speak, is really helpful. We are out of time, but I would love it if y'all could maybe drop your contact information in the chat, just so that our participants could have that information if you're comfortable with that, so that they could reach out if they have any other questions, only if you're comfortable with it. But we appreciate you so much for being here with us. And thank you to everyone else for joining us here today. I hope that you enjoyed this discussion. And this is our last forum of the semester, so we're so glad that you could join us for the final one. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a lovely evening.
Thanks, you too.